I never believed in the things people whispered about the woods. Ghosts, monsters, shadows that moved on their own. I thought it was just stories to keep kids from wandering too far. But after what happened to me at Hollow Creek, I know the truth. There's something out there, something patient and intelligent, and it doesn't like being observed. I was in college at the time, stressed out and looking for an escape. My roommate suggested Hollow Creek, a remote patch of forest several hours away, known for its hiking trails and crystal clear water. He warned me not to go alone, but I insisted. I needed the solitude, the silence. I packed my bag with the essentials: tent, food, water, a small camping stove, and my camera. I wanted to photograph the creek, the way the light hit the water at sunset. I arrived late afternoon, the sky a muted orange, the forest welcoming in that deceptively peaceful way. The first hour was perfect. Birds chirping, the creek gurgling over rocks, the smell of pine and wet earth filling my lungs. I set up my tent near the water, thinking I was clever to find a spot tucked away from the main trail. I wandered a little, snapping photos, trying to capture the sunlight filtering through the leaves. Everything felt normal. Too normal in hindsight. Night fell fast. I had just crawled into my tent when I heard it. A faint rustling in the underbrush. At first I thought it was an animal. A raccoon, maybe a deer, but the sound was deliberate, like someone pacing. I froze. My heart thumped, and I reminded myself that the woods had their sounds, that I was imagining things. I closed my eyes, but sleep didn't come. Around midnight, the noises changed. Whispers drifted to me through the trees. Not words I could understand, just low murmurs rising and falling like waves. I unzipped my tent slightly to peek out. Moonlight lit the forest in a cold silver glow. Shadows danced unnaturally. One in particular, tall and thin, moved at the edge of my vision. I blinked and it was gone. I tried to laugh it off, but the laughter felt hollow in my throat. The next morning, I decided to hike further along the creek. I wanted to see where it led. The trail narrowed, branches scraping my arms, and the forest grew denser. The birds had vanished. The air was heavier, oppressive, and I felt eyes on me constantly. I told myself it was paranoia, but the feeling didn't relent. Something was following me just out of sight. By late afternoon, I stumbled upon a small clearing. The creek widened here, forming a pool that reflected the sky like a mirror. I set down my pack, took out my camera, and snapped photos. That's when I saw them. Tiny footprints pressed into the mud around the water. At first, I thought they were from an animal, but they were too human-like, too precise, almost delicate. I felt a cold spike of fear, yet curiosity pushed me forward. I followed the prints into the trees. Hours passed, though it felt like minutes and days all at once. The forest twisted unnaturally. Branches arched over my head, forming tunnels that shouldn't exist. I thought about turning back, but the trail had disappeared. I realized I was lost. Panic set in. I called out, my voice bouncing off the trees, swallowed instantly. Then I heard the whispering again, close now, almost in my ears. Come, come, come. I ran blindly, slipping over roots and rocks until I reached a small stone bridge crossing the creek. That's when I saw it, movement under the water. Something large, impossibly large, weaving between the rocks. It wasn't an animal. Its form was wrong. Elongated, featureless, with limbs bending at angles that made no sense. I froze, heart pounding, and then it rose from the water for a fraction of a second, just above the surface, and I could see its face, or what passed for one. Smooth, dark, empty. Then it vanished again. I stumbled back, falling to my knees, breathing ragged. I wanted to run, but my legs were trembling violently. The whispering didn't stop. It moved around me, circling, sometimes behind me, sometimes above. I could hear its slow, deliberate breathing, though no one was there. I realized then that whatever followed me was not just intelligent, it was patient. It had been waiting, maybe always waiting. Night came again. I managed to set up my tent, though my hands shook too much to secure the stakes properly. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. At one point, I swear I saw shadows pass over the walls of the tent, stretching, twisting like limbs reaching in. I held my flashlight above my head, trembling, hoping to catch a glimpse, but the light revealed nothing. Yet I could feel it watching, moving just beyond the circle of illumination. Sleep was impossible. Every sound made me jump. A branch snapping, water dripping, a distant animal call. Around 2 in the morning, I heard a knock. Not outside, inside the tent. slow, deliberate, like someone testing my resolve. I whispered, "Who's there?" The sound stopped. A second later, it began again, now accompanied by a low, guttural whisper I understood instinctively. "Leave." I stayed as still as possible, gripping my camera like a talisman. The whispering continued through the night, never stopping. At one point, I swear I saw the tent walls bend inward as if something outside was pushing, testing, trying to breach my fragile shelter. The morning light couldn't come fast enough. When it did, I peeked outside. The forest was empty, eerily calm. No footprints, no shadows, no sign of the figure in the water from the night before. I tried to hike back toward the trail, but the woods had changed. Familiar landmarks were gone. Trees that had been distant now loomed nearby. The creek twisted unnaturally. It was as if the forest itself had shifted overnight, trapping me deeper and deeper. Desperation clawed at me. I ran again, ignoring exhaustion, ignoring pain, ignoring the rational part of my mind that screamed to stop and think. By late afternoon, I found a small cabin hidden among dense pines. Its walls were covered in dark stains and the windows were black with grime. I didn't want to go inside, but I needed shelter, and the thought of the forest waiting outside was unbearable. The door creaked as I pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick and musty. I could barely make out furniture, tables, chairs, a bed, but everything was covered in dust. On the floor were footprints similar to the ones I had seen by the creek leading in and out of the cabin. I didn't stay long. As soon as I stepped outside, the forest seemed to shift again. Shadows moved faster, shapes elongated. The whispering returned, louder, more urgent. It followed me, circling, waiting. I ran until night fell again, stumbling into the creek itself to escape. And that's when I realized. The water was filled with shapes, writhing beneath the surface. The same featureless beings I had glimpsed before. They moved toward me slowly at first, testing, then faster. I managed to scramble out of the creek and collapse on the bank. My flashlight flickered weakly. That's when I saw them fully. Dozens of them gliding through the trees, moving impossibly fast, limbs bending at angles that made no sense. Their faces were empty voids, but I could feel their gaze on me, probing, assessing. I screamed, but my voice was swallowed by the forest. I ran until dawn. Eventually, the forest thinned and I found the trail. I kept running until I reached my car, lungs burning, skin raw, mind shattered. I didn't stop until I reached the city, but even here the whispers linger. I hear them in my apartment sometimes, soft and distant, like wind through the trees calling me back. I've tried to warn people. I've tried to tell friends, authorities, anyone who will listen. No one believes me. The photos I took are corrupted. Black streaks, blurred shapes, shadows that shouldn't exist. Every now and then I see them in reflections, in water and glass, just at the edge of perception. And I know Hollow Creek is patient. It waits, it watches. It remembers. And someday it will call me back and I will have no choice but to answer. I haven't gone back. I never will. But I can still feel it, stretching, creeping, waiting just beyond the edge of my world. And I know that the forest is alive in ways we cannot comprehend. And it does not forgive curiosity. I shouldn't have gone back. I knew that the moment I saw the for rent sign nailed crookedly to a tree deep in the woods. But something about it drew me in, some irrational pull that I can't explain even now. I had been hiking alone for years, seeking solitude, and when I spotted the small wooden cabin tucked behind a copse of pines, it seemed like a miracle, an escape from the chaos of my city life. I didn't notice the air smelled heavier there, or that the birds avoided the trees surrounding it. It was late afternoon when I approached, my backpack slung over one shoulder. The cabin was old, with peeling paint and a sagging porch, but it had an oddly comforting aura, like it had been waiting for someone. I laughed at myself for thinking that, but the woods have a way of making you feel ridiculous and terrified all at once. A faded note was tacked to the door. 1 week. Don't disturb. Do not leave things outside. Don't look through the windows. I paused, fingers brushing the rough wood. A warning. Or an invitation. Curiosity won. I took a deep breath, turned the knob, it was unlocked, and stepped inside. The air smelled of damp wood, dust, and something else I couldn't place, like iron or old blood. The floorboards groaned under my weight. The interior was modest. A small kitchen, a table with 2 chairs, a sleeping loft accessed by a narrow ladder. On the table lay a notebook, pages yellowed and brittle. I opened it. The handwriting was small and cramped, frantic at times. It spoke of a man who had rented the cabin years before, someone who claimed the forest itself had begun to watch him. He wrote of footsteps outside when no one was there, whispers through the walls, shapes at the corner of his vision. I laughed nervously to myself, reading aloud, trying to dispel the creeping unease. Of course, it was just the usual paranoia people talk about when alone in the woods. That's what I told myself. I spent the night in the cabin feeling an uncomfortable mix of excitement and dread. At first, it was peaceful. I cooked some canned beans over the small gas stove, drank cold water from my bottle, and listened to the wind stirring the pines outside. But just as I was falling asleep, I heard it, a soft scratching coming from the walls themselves. Not the kind caused by settling wood, not the kind caused by rodents. This was methodical, deliberate, rhythmic. I froze, straining to hear. It stopped abruptly. My pulse surged and I whispered, "Hello?" Silence. Sleep came fitfully. When I woke, the morning light did little to calm me. The forest outside seemed darker somehow, shadows lying unnaturally across the ground. I decided to explore. There was a path, barely more than a clearing between the trees, leading further into the woods. I followed it, notebook in hand, taking notes like a journalist documenting the eerie silence. Hours passed. The deeper I went, the more I felt the eyes on me. Not birds, not deer, but something patient and deliberate, watching from behind trunks and branches. I returned to the cabin before sunset, feeling relief until I noticed something on the porch. Footprints, small, thin, bare feet that weren't mine. They led from the edge of the woods right up to the cabin door. My stomach turned. I knew I hadn't seen anyone. I hadn't heard anyone. Yet the evidence was there. I tried to rationalize. Maybe a local child wandered into the woods. Maybe a neighbor playing a prank. But deep down I knew neither explanation fit. That night it began in earnest. The whispers returned, growing louder, more insistent. Not through the walls this time, but inside my head. I could hear syllables, words forming just out of comprehension. Like some language I should recognize but couldn't. I covered my ears, screamed at the top of my lungs, but the sounds only intensified, echoing in the cabin and beyond, bouncing off unseen trees. Shadows flitted past the windows. Shapes crouched on the porch railing. I tried to leave, but when I touched the doorknob, it was ice cold, unyielding. The cabin wouldn't let me out. Hours passed, minutes, days, I can't be sure. Time became meaningless. I scribbled in the notebook, my handwriting erratic. They are patient, watching, waiting. I can hear them whispering my name. I can feel their eyes in my skull. I tried to leave, but the cabin, no, the forest, will not release me. Eventually, I stopped trying to rationalize. I stopped moving. I just listened. The whispers sometimes coalesced into words. Stay, come, see, join. Sometimes they were laughter, sometimes sobs, sometimes nothing at all. Just a thick, oppressive silence that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. And always the scratching, always close, always patient. I began noticing changes in the cabin itself. Walls that had been straight bent slightly, corners narrowing. Windows that had been clear became dark, reflective in ways they shouldn't. Sometimes when I looked up, I would see shapes perched on beams above my head, long limbs dangling, faces impossible, watching. I don't remember when I stopped screaming. I don't remember when I stopped trying to leave. I only remember that the forest outside grew closer, thicker, as if it was pressing inward, folding the cabin into itself. Then one morning, I think it was morning, the front door was open. Fresh air and sunlight spilled into the cabin, breaking through the darkness. I didn't hesitate. I ran, sprinted through the woods, not even bothering with the trail I had followed before. Branches tore at my clothes, thorns raked my skin, but I didn't care. I ran until I stumbled onto a gravel road. My car was there as if I had never left it. I didn't stop until I reached the nearest town, breathless and bleeding, telling anyone who would listen about the cabin in the forest that tried to keep me. Most people laughed, some were polite, some looked at me with pity. No one believed me. I tried to sleep that night. I couldn't. The whispers were in my head, faint but insistent. The cabin's shape haunted my dreams, impossibly twisted, stretching endlessly into the woods. I could feel the scratching beneath my skin. I could see shapes in the corners of my vision, crouched and patient, waiting for the next time I dared to enter the forest. I never went back. I never will. But sometimes when I close my eyes, I can see the cabin through the trees waiting. The pines bend toward it, and I can hear the faintest scratching on the walls. And I know with the certainty that chills me to my core that it is patient. It waits for me or for someone else, and it will not release them. Now, years later, I still hear it in my dreams, and sometimes when I walk alone, I think I hear that same whisper carried by the wind. My name, soft coaxing, promising safety and doom at the same time. I have tried to warn people, but the cabin never shows itself on maps. It exists outside of normal space. And I have learned something I wish I hadn't. Curiosity is not a mistake you can undo. Some doors, some forests, some cabins, they are patient, and they will wait. I still carry the notebook. Its pages are blank now, but every once in a while, faint scratches appear on the paper as if someone or something is writing on them when I'm not looking. Sometimes I hear the whispers from the pages themselves calling me back into the woods, and I know someday I might not resist. I've always loved the woods. Even as a kid, I felt more at home between the trees than anywhere else. There's a rhythm to them, a pulse beneath the branches that feels alive, like the earth itself is breathing. My friends never understood why I would spend entire weekends wandering trails while they stayed behind with their video games or movies. But it was peace, and I craved it. That peace didn't last the last time I went. It turned into something that made me question every quiet moment I'd ever cherished in the forest. It started innocuously enough. I had planned a solo camping trip in the northern part of the state, somewhere far enough from the roads that my phone had no signal. I packed my bag with extra water, food, a small first aid kit, and my camera. I had been trying to document the woods for a small personal project, capturing light filtering through branches, fog curling over fallen leaves, things like that. I left late Friday morning, driving for hours until the asphalt dissolved into gravel, and the gravel gave way to packed dirt trails. By the time I parked and unloaded my gear, it was nearing sunset, and the forest around me glowed with that golden-orange light that only comes when the sun is low. I hiked a little ways in, choosing a spot by a creek where the water ran clear and the sounds of the world beyond the trees faded into a soft murmur. I pitched my tent, lit a small fire, and sat down with my journal to make some notes. It was quiet in a way I wasn't used to. No distant car engines, no planes, just the rustling of leaves and the occasional bird call. Perfect. But by nightfall, the first weird thing happened. I was lying in my tent scrolling through some photos I'd taken when I heard it. A faint tapping on the tent fabric. Not the kind caused by the wind. Slow, deliberate, like fingernails brushing the canvas. I froze. My heart raced, and I told myself it was probably just a branch swaying in the wind. I tried to ignore it, but the tapping persisted, softer now, almost hesitant. I held my breath and whispered, "Hello?" Nothing. Eventually, I convinced myself it was nothing and drifted off to sleep, though it took me hours to calm my racing mind. I woke around 2 in the morning to the sound of whispering. At first, I thought I was dreaming. Voices low, unintelligible, almost floating through the walls of the tent. I rolled over, heart hammering, and listened. The whispering moved around me, sometimes behind my head, sometimes by my feet. I unzipped the tent slightly, peering out into the blackness. The creek reflected faint moonlight, and the trees swayed gently in the night breeze. Nothing. I tried to tell myself I was hearing things, the isolation playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew it wasn't my imagination. It sounded like a language almost, or maybe chanting, broken and uneven. The next morning, I packed up some courage and ventured deeper into the woods. I followed a narrow trail, taking photos along the way. By midday, I stumbled upon a clearing I didn't recognize from any map. At first, it seemed beautiful. Sunlight poured in, illuminating a small patch of wildflowers and moss-covered rocks. But as I looked closer, I saw that the flowers were trampled in a strange pattern, almost like circles, and the moss on the rocks was scraped away in patches, revealing dark, wet soil underneath. My stomach sank, but I took a few more photos, trying to convince myself it was natural. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. By evening, the whispers had returned, louder this time. Not through the tent, but around me, carried by the wind. I packed up my camp as fast as I could and decided to hike back to the car, feeling a weight pressing down in the forest, something unseen and patient. But the forest wasn't the same. Trails I thought I knew twisted unexpectedly. Rocks that hadn't been there before appeared in my path. Shadows moved in ways that made no sense. Elongated shapes twisting in angles the trees shouldn't have cast. Panic set in, I began calling out, my voice hoarse, echoing unnaturally through the forest. But there was no reply besides the whispering, which now sounded closer, more urgent. Almost impatient, hours passed, I don't know how many. My flashlight's battery was dying, my legs were bleeding from unseen thorns. And then I saw it, a figure between the trees. At first I thought it was a person, someone watching me. But it didn't move like a human. Its limbs were too long, its head too small, and its eyes, or what I thought were eyes, glowed faintly in the darkness. It didn't walk. It seemed to glide, as if the ground itself obeyed it. I froze, and it tilted its head at me, almost curiously, and then it vanished. Just like that. I ran blindly, not even knowing if I was going toward the car or deeper into the forest. The whispering followed me, and I could swear I heard footsteps, though I didn't see anyone. At one point I tripped and fell into the creek. The water was icy, shocking me into awareness. When I looked up, the woods were empty, silent for the first time in hours. I crawled back to the trail and kept moving, desperate for any sign of civilization. By the time I reached the edge of the woods just before dawn, my phone caught a faint signal. I called the police and my parents, trying to explain what happened, but my voice sounded broken even to me. They didn't believe me. Who would? I had no proof, only photos, some of which had strange anomalies, blurs and shadows that I hadn't noticed when taking them, and in one a tall, thin figure crouched behind a tree, watching me. I've never gone back. I can't. Sometimes, though, at night I hear it again, a soft tapping, a whisper at the edge of hearing, and I know it's waiting for me, somewhere between the pines, patient and inevitable. Even now as I tell this story, I feel the brush of leaves at my shoulder, the way the air thickens in certain corners of my apartment, the faintest echo of that whisper. I don't know if it followed me home or if I just carry it with me now, like a shadow fused to my own skin. I've tried to rationalize it, to tell myself that it was fear, that isolation makes your mind conjure monsters. But I've never been so certain of anything in my life. The woods aren't empty, and whatever waits there is still watching. Sometimes I think I can hear it even when I'm awake. Not outside, not behind my walls, but inside my mind. And I wonder if anyone who disappears in the deep woods ever really leaves.